Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets lose to the LA Lakers on their home court, creating a contrast over the weekend between two games that crystallize where the Nets truly struggle to fight and win against the best in the league. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen today. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And Doug, when the Nets lose and win over the weekend, we always prefer they do it the other way around as we come in to talk about the 116-104 home loss to the Lakers that, quite frankly, started out about as ugly as humanly possible.
Yeah, it had me Googling whether or not a team had ever been shut out in a basketball game, in an NBA game before. They hadn't, but the Nets gave it the old college try where that was concerned. And really in the contrast between two games, between on Friday night where they kind of start to suck you back in and make you believe, maybe they're going to make a little run here, end of the season. They literally could have thrown up shots backwards. It felt like they would have gone in against the Bulls, and then they come out against the Lakers and literally can't score for the first 6 minutes of the game or 6+ minutes of the game. And it's just a reminder that this is kind of where we are with this Nets team at this point. They have some fight in them, and, they worked hard to try to stay within 10 points of this game, which is, really not something they were able to do. But yeah, they have it in them to have these games like they had against Chicago where they shoot the lights out and looks like everything's rolling downhill. And then you face LeBron and the Lakers, who really need to win games also. And, LeBron basically sets his career record for most three-pointers in a game, going 9 for 10. And that's kind of ends up being the story in the 116-104 loss.
Yeah, and you mentioned there 125-108. The Nets beat the Chicago Bulls going back a couple days ago, where they shot just a little, 25 of 44, 57% from beyond the arc. And as you say, the old Houdini, magic tricks, no look, everything's going for them there. But I also think, as you mentioned, LeBron James, the Lakers, it's about the exposure of matchups here, right? Because all season long, we've said, hey, individually, is there talent on the Nets roster? Yes, there is. But whether it's that they're not a two-way player or they don't have the ability to be matchup proof, as not every player in the league is, but there's the little LeBron James, there's the ADs of the world. And when you get into these types of games and you see this type of size, all of a sudden, all of the matchup failures get exposed the way they wouldn't possibly be against the Chicago Bulls on Friday night.
Yeah, and it was just really evident early on that the Nets were going to struggle with that size, right? Like every time Mikal got the ball, he was running into one of Roy, Hachimura, Anthony Davis, or like best case scenario, LeBron out of those three.
Always know you're in a bad spot when your best case scenario is running into LeBron James.
Right. So he had nowhere to go early on in this game at all defensively. And and he ran into Alex Caruso on Friday, but it ended up not mattering because that kind of everyone else started making shots, and then it was kind of away you go. In this game, where the Lakers basically instantly took away the second scoring option completely. I mean, he was completely swallowed up. They do never need to bring any help when one of those three guys ends up getting Mikal in the switch, because we've seen him really, really struggle against opposers' size. When he goes against bigger wings in the league, if they end up on him, like he really can't do anything at all. Like when he faces the Magic, when it's like a Paolo or Franz kind of matchup, or games like this or like the Pacers, right? It's like Aaron Nesmith. It's like, okay, see you tomorrow. It's just not going to happen for him. He really can't do it. So when he ends up against these bigger guys, he just struggles so much. And if that's going to be the case, the Nets, we've seen it until they put a little more size in the court, which they do. They get Watford out there and they try to take a little bit off of his plate. But until they do that, like their offense just bogs down. And yeah, is it like an outlier to not score any points for the first 6 or whatever minutes of the game? For sure. But it's like not that much of an outlier when you look at what's actually happening, right? Yeah. Like if Cam's shot's not going to fall early, not his fault at all, but if it's not going to fall early and Mikal's not going to get any room to operate, where are the points coming from? Right. Like at that point, they just really sort of pot stuck on where they can even start to generate half court offense. So that's what we really saw early on. Again, outlier a little bit to not score at all during that time, but also it's not like all run bad, right? Like sometimes you're like, okay, well, this is all unlucky. It wasn't unlucky. They ran into a brick wall against a team that they're just going to, when that other team has a lot of size, that's like the Nets. I mean, kryptonite's like referencing like if they're Superman.
That suggests that the Lakers need to find that mythical way to break down the Brooklyn Nets, right? What's the next
I know. That's why I was
having a better team. Oh, damn it. They got us again.
Yeah, if it was like if Superman had just like something that made it, or like Superman, like Jimmy Olsen had things that made being a photographer a little harder. Like that's what, like that's kind of that was kind of
battling Superman. They're battling the local photographer from the paper.
Yeah, it was like like he's like Jimmy's having a little trouble getting the photos for the Daily Planet. Like that's kind of what the scenario is for the Nets in this one.
And it is too, because you mentioned it, like athleticism gets exposed in these types of games because it isn't just the size, and it's also the ability to create your own space, to create your own opportunities, and taking away one of those key elements in Mikal Bridges then puts a lot of pressure onto Cam Thomas. And we'll talk about him coming up here. But just to round out with Mikal, a game where he finishes 5 of 16, 13 points over 38 minutes. And again, we always talk about, if you can't do something to impact the game, direct one-to-one scoring, how do you make other players better around you? That's what Mikal Bridges kind of lacks in his game. And it's not, we're not knocking him here. He's not on the hierarchy above LeBron James, above Anthony Davis, right? Above a lot of these players. But I think these matchups redefine, after you come off a game like Friday night, hey, look at these two players, Cam and Mikal, over 50 points. This is the back-to-earth matchup. And I think you also hit the nail on the head about games that really matter, right? Like the Lakers need this game, need a lot of these games down the stretch of the season. So whether or not that effort, that desire, that push there, when you're down 26-6 in the first quarter, you start to get the sense of counting down the clock of the season versus feeling like you're trying to play spoilers here. And while that disparity is certainly a wide margin, overall for the Brooklyn Nets, this is the familiar pattern of not being able to sustain or find offensive options when teams start to switch things up and take away one of those two key players.
And I know we're starting with Mikal here. We're going to talk Cam Thomas, obviously, because it's like we're going to spend a decent amount of time talking about him because he continues to warrant a lot of just sort of future look ahead. But what you've seen from Mikal too, which is it's sort of like we're recentering our idea around what he is, right? We came out of last year with an idea that like, oh, he's going to take this leap into this, like, sort of 3-level scorer. And, and he's going to sort of like carry the load for the Nets going forward on the offensive end, or at least like, sort of like maybe he's a 1A guy. Mm-hmm. What we've seen for him definitely in the short term, and this kind of dovetails with Cam Thomas taking on more scoring. We've actually seen Mikal kind of just go back to what he was in Phoenix, which is spot up 3-point shooter. And that's kind of it, because if you look at his shot chart over the last, I mean, really 7 games. Yeah, but we'll say 7 games. Without reading all the numbers here, I mean, there's like tonight, 16 shots, 11 were threes. Even in Chicago, where he played pretty well, 15 shots, 11 were threes. Yeah. Washington, 16, 9, 15 and 12 against Toronto, right? Like he's just shooting 3-pointers. He's just he's a spot up 3-point shooter now. And he's gone back to sort of like 3 and D. And the D is going to be hard on this one because he's, forced to deal with like, really, really big guys where he's just a kind of a slight guy. But I mean, we're just seeing him regress all the way back to take the threes when they're there. And that's kind of all the shots. Right. Right. And I don't know if it's troubling or if it's just what the reality is. Like, that's just where we are with him. He is taking, I mean, this is a quick math here. He's probably taken like 70% of his shots are threes. Yeah. And that's not I'll do the math real quick in a second, but like, that's basically where we are with him as a scoring option.
And that's why coming up here on the other side of the break, we'll talk about Cam Thomas, his performance. I'll push a bold question to Doug Norrie about what is Cam worth right now and the trades that could be on the docket for this offseason. But ultimately, how is he performing at such a high level as we see Mikal Bridges start to step back a little bit into that supporting role that he once had in Phoenix? We'll get into that coming up here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, we'll tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Look, March is over, but the biggest moments in college basketball tip off the month of April. Be part of the action of Prize Picks for both men's and women's college basketball. Get in on the playoff action. Win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you would the world's best players. Take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can now win up to 100x your money on Prize Picks with as few as 4 correct picks. You turn $10 into 1,000. Basketball, hockey, college basketball entries, they're all there on PrizePicks, is America's #1 fantasy app, sports app. Remember, all you're doing on PrizePicks, you're just going more or less on those PrizePicks projections. You pick the players you like, you pick the stats that you want to go more or less on, and away you go. Like I said, up to 100x over our friends on PrizePicks. All you got to do, download the app today, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Download the app today, PrizePicks app. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, so as we continue the post-game episode for the Locked On Nets podcast and for the Brooklyn Nets, we remind you guys, get over to Twitter or X, whatever you want to refer to it as, and give at Doug Norrie a follow, give at Adam Armbrecht a follow, and at Locked On Nets. Why? Because you could have seen these two classy guys really syncing up our outfits over the weekend, having a heck of a time getting together for a family occasion. Hope everybody had a good one as well. That being the case, Doug, okay, Mikal Bridges is regressing into the shadows, but what isn't happening is Cam Thomas is not falling off a cliff at the back end of the season. He is in a game where you go and look at the box score, puts up in 35 minutes. Now it's 8 of 22. And you mentioned there at the top, it's his struggles early are not on him, but he's a 30-point scorer in this game, gets to the line 12 times in this game, has 6 assists as well here. We are now, remember, asked the question, is he entering the superstar kind of conversation? That's TBD. But he's not stopping being a high-level productive scorer that any team that wants to be competitive going forward is going to need. I have an interesting question to ask you about it, but how do you feel about his performance in this game where it is another difficult task for him, especially without Mikal giving that supporting role?
Yeah, I mean, it's just tough for him again. Like, he's got a lot on his plate here with having to score, right? Like I said, and by the way, I did the quick math on that. I said 70%, it was 69.4%. So your boy did some pretty good mental math there on the way out of the Bridges thing. Yeah, so he's just got a lot of on his plate now, and he's facing more double teams. Didn't have to face as many in this game just because they're so long defensively. If he gets a disadvantageous switch, like, they don't really need to bring a lot of help. I don't think the Lakers are too worried about situations like this, just knowing most of their guys can kind of hold up against Cam. But he's just got a lot on his plate now when it comes to the offensive, being sort of the offensive engine around, because if he doesn't score, like I said, but we said before, the Nets have very, very few options. I think he's taken that load pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're still going to probably see bad shots from him at times, but I think that's just the reality in which we live. A bad Cam Thomas shot at this point sometimes is like the most they can hope for. I mean, the Nets had multiple times where they basically ran out of the shot clock because they couldn't get anything off right in this game. So at that point, sort of a tough shot from him, body facing away. We see him do this a ton, right? Body facing away, head facing toward the basket, everything else away. I can't really blame him at this point, because when you look at where the rest of the team is, and you also see that there's, I mean, for sure growth on the just overall court vision. Last 4 games, 6 assists, 7 assists, 4 assists, 6 assists. He's increased by month. His assists have gone up 10 to 20% by month over the course of the season, right? Mm-hmm. And let me land the plane here. It's much easier for me to forgive the bad shots when the assists are also coming, right?
Well, by the way, sorry not to jump in. We said this exactly about Mikal Bridges, right? When you're not scoring, you're not being productive, you're struggling there. We try to look to other categories, the assist, facilitate, and set the table. And then over time, we said, well, he's not even doing that now. And that's why you have a real problem. So when we get to Cam and you say, there's no other secondary real score here you can rely on with consistency, and you're doing both scoring a ton of points, having those lulls, which I actually think is like over the course of a 48-minute game, a fatigue factor when you go back to his well over and over again on offensive possessions, but you are seeing the other elements of the game develop here as well. So that's why it's really easy, not excuses, but it's really easy to look at the positives for Cam and not really be overly concerned about some of the downsides across these last few games.
Yeah, and some of it's okay, so the assists have gone up. Some of it is like just minutes based, right? Like it just plays more minutes in the month of, let's say, if we're just using month, like, has delineations, because it's just kind of sometimes just easier to section it off that way. Like, he is just playing more minutes. Like, played 36.6 minutes in March. He played 33.3, 33.1 in February. His assists per minute are generally about the same, but those are for sure up from assists per minute earlier in the season. And I think there could be a tendency with his game now to take even more shots, like looking around at the rest of the team. It's just not very good, right? Like he could be incentivized to take even more shots because like just kind of sometimes giving it off is not going to be that EV of a move. I think that he's not defaulting that way and is going into just sort of a better read and react game is better, even if like the assist numbers are probably floated a little bit because the minutes are up. And I'll say too, this is all eye test, I think, but it does feel like the Nets have missed a decent amount of shots off of good looks by him.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be me just like sort of wish casting a little bit, but I do think it has felt like that also. Like I felt like he's made a lot of good reads and they haven't all gone down. And that might just be the nature of the game too. But overall, I just think it's been a really, really positive couple of months for him, and specifically positive like last couple weeks stretch, even during some Nets losses.
And it's funny too, because a part of that to me does read a little bit like maybe it's eye test and otherwise, but the last couple of weeks, as you say, it feels a little bit like the reality of, well, Mikal Bridges is not going to be X for the organization unless you make other moves, and he can be in a certain role, but he's not going to be the face of this franchise going forward. And then we've known that for a longer amount of time, obviously. But then the last 2 weeks to me, in some ways, feel kind of like, hey, maybe we just put Cam behind the wheel. And he's our young player. He's our first round pick, right? And we say, you know what? However long we took in your developmental track, here are the keys. And if you can do sometimes what we've seen in spurts, where when he was given a longer leash, it resulted in, hey, I'm going to take every single shot. I'm going to have blinders on. You're not going to see me look for others for shooters. You're not going to see me use the gravity of my offensive game to set others up. Now, all of a sudden, hey, if over the remainder of this season, you show that you are doing the both and that your game is evolving, we head into the offseason and into next season feeling like you are our centerpiece and we can build around you. And if we don't get this type of sample size, which has been so positive overall for him, we might have a different thought process, right? Like we might approach this offseason differently if we didn't feel like Thomas was ready to take that next overall step forward, which matters greatly if he's going to be an impact player for this team in the long run.
It would seem to be the case, right? I'm still not totally trustful of like how the organization, it's so easy to play him now.
Well,
right?
Like, by the way, and their decisions get made for them sometimes because you've lost a lot of games, and this is house money now. It doesn't matter, right? Like low impact, low risk.
Exactly. Like it would be abject insanity to not play him
if he wasn't.
Right. So but I'm still just so distrustful of sort of how the organization has handled the situation from the beginning that I don't feel like I have a clear picture of like how they really feel about it. It's really it's really easy. They've had a lot of decisions that have sort of fallen into their lap, right?
Yeah.
Because of injuries and just context and trades, and they just don't need to worry about it anymore. It's just obvious he should play a lot of minutes. But I don't know if that would be a sign that the organization has full trust in his abilities going forward. I don't think, let me put it this way. I don't think this stretch, because he's playing a lot and taking a lot of shots now, I don't think that is necessarily proves the rule that they think he's like this X player. I just think it's like literally who else is going to play. Right now, it sounds like it's a knock on him. It's not. It's more of just like a being not wanting to place my belief, the team's belief in him based on this recent run, because they've had long stretches where it was very clear they didn't believe him at all.
And that's why coming up here in a second, whether or not the organization truly believes in Cam Thomas, TBD. But what about another young player in Trendon Watford who has now strung together a run of games that should give the fan base optimism? Does the organization believe? We'll go ahead and dive in on that coming up next.
All right, but before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at Amazon Fire TV, baby. Fire TV, destination for sports. They got live games, they got highlights, they got in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs. Well, it's the Fire TV stick you can plug into your existing TV, provides access to millions of movies, millions, you heard me right, and TV episodes, as well as free and live TV. Maybe you want to get baseball, you want to get college basketball going. It's all there for you on Fire TV. They get the Fire TV channels, deliver constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes us over at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. The Fire TV lets you dive into all the game analysis highlights and more. Right now, check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That's Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV.
All right, so as we tie a pretty little bow, not only on the loss for the Brooklyn Nets at home to the LA Lakers, crushing the dreams of Nets fans everywhere that maybe a spark was happening. By the way, 5.5 games back of the Atlanta Hawks. The dream is dead. Don't worry about that. But gosh darn it, if this team doesn't love to tease you in any emotional way possible. As we say there, okay, Cam Thomas, man, we're going to have a long, lengthy discussions. We're going to have another discussion coming up about a bigger picture question around him. But Trendon Watford, and I mentioned this going back to the last episode before the Chicago game, where you and I had just discussed him and said, he's a little erratic, though. He plays a little out of control. And then he kind of comes back, and the box score wasn't as strong the next game. But the eye test said, here's a guy that does have a role and can find a way to play consistent. Are you interested at all in the idea that seeing him do a little ball handling and all the skill sets that we've seen before is expandable going forward beyond this season? Or is this another, out of necessity, that's why Trendon Watford's getting these minutes, that's why you're seeing him do some things maybe that ideally the team would prefer not to?
I will say, okay, so it's been really positive. So I'll start 100%. There, right? It's been like the last 4 games, he's been just good. He's been a regular rotation guy. Look, 21, 19, 24, and 29 minutes. Like he was the first guy in tonight, which makes sense because they really needed his size against that bigger front line. So it was actually a nice move by them, Kevin Ollie and company, to like kind of get him in quick. Played 29 minutes, was +5 on the game too. Like in a game where it wasn't all garbage time minutes. Like, like Clowney and Jalen Wilson are +8, but they were in there at the end.
Should have started.
Watford's were just kind of winning minutes while he was in there. Over the last 14 points per game, 50% from 3 on 3 attempts. So it's not like a ton of attempts, but like the threes are going down. He's been a +2 on average during that time. It's been really positive. Again, this time of year, it is a little hard to judge. Teams' motivations are all over the place. Mm-hmm. And sometimes effort does get you kind of far, like at this time of year, like depending on the game. That being said, his skill set is of the type that it would make sense, you would think, to keep him around because he's versatile enough. And I misspoke a couple of days ago because when we first talked about it, I was like, I'm like a little worried about the threes, but that was just wrong. I should have just checked that. I mean, he's shooting 40% from 3 this year, not on a lot of attempts, like only 1 attempt per game.
Like volume concern more than anything else.
But like lately, the attempts have gone up, 3 per game over this run, and where he's knocking them down at a nice clip. So it makes sense. Like the Nets kind of need this kind of guy to sort of like to be a jack of all trades, master of none. But he is good enough at like all those other little things that you can deal with the sort of like, let me cook in my kitchen moments, which I think are fine because the team doesn't really have any other guys that can do that anyway.
Well, it's funny too, because you mentioned there in this month, now the minutes are incredibly lower, right? You're playing in single digits. There's a 19-point spike going back to the game against the Pacers, but over 9 games to start the month of March, he took 4 shots from beyond the arc. Then over these last 5 games, even though just 1 for 1 going back to the New York matchup, 4, 3, 3, 2. And it's less about, the volume per se, so much as the consistency that game in and game out, this is a part of what your role is, right? And that maybe always relates back to the coaching staff. One of the reasons.
And by the way, real quick, those 3-point attempts aren't commensurate on a per minute basis. Like they've gone up per minute.
Yeah.
So he's just taking more per minute. So yes, the minutes help him take more, but he's also just taking more in those minutes also. Sorry. I just want to jump in and clarify on that.
No. And it's one of the reasons why, like, when we talk about players, any of these young players, and you sometimes think about going back to the offseason ahead of this year, you bring in this young player, he played in Portland, get him more minutes. We think this role could exist here for him. And then it goes dormant. It goes quiet. It's always one of these kind of confounding things. You bring in players and talents like this, and then you choose not to utilize them, not to explore their game, not to find out what they can be for you. And while on the one hand, as he's in his 1-year, $2 million contract, so you're going to have to now make a decision on him in the offseason. The irony here for me is probably, will it be hard for the Brooklyn Nets to retain him and bring him back and keep him in the fold? No. But if it's not informed by wanting him to be a part of this team, you accidentally walk yourself into showcasing him for other teams. And all of a sudden, a better opportunity, another offer somewhere else comes down the pike for him. And that's what I wonder about all these guys. Dennis Smith Jr. is hurt right now. Lonnie Walker's run really cold, and Kevin Ollie has kind of put him in the doghouse, wanting a total player, not just a shooter, and struggling from beyond the arc. But all these guys, they fall into this bucket of, what are you going to do with them? And whether or not the Nets have all the money in the world when it comes to the offseason with the contract tie-ups, some of these margin players matter. And I just wonder if Trendon Watford is making the case to be a part of it, or if the Nets are just running out the string here and they have, a much larger picture that, whether we agree with it or not, is going to be in play here when we hit the offseason.
Yeah, and one note about him too, because I know people are going to say, "Oh, we should have been playing him all year," and like, look what happens is the Nets doing it again. This does happen with every team. Like this time of year, guys get hurt, guys kind of get by circumstance get put into lineups, and they end up performing really well.
Yeah.
And sometimes there just aren't minutes for guys earlier in the year based on the way you were structured. So I do want to like pump the brakes. I know people are going to say, "Oh, we should have been playing him all year. You should have been playing more." It might be correct, but like this isn't a Nets only thing where they just have like I could go through every team and list guys who didn't play at all at the beginning of the year and are now playing like real rotational minutes that matter, like Golden State, Trace Jackson Davis. I mean, like Houston, like Jalen Green was a nobody, not a nobody. That's wrong. He was well underperforming. And now he's like the greatest player in basketball, right? Because of circumstance, like he got put into a situation. Miles McBride over in New York. It's like Barry at the end of the year. Now he plays 48 minutes a game. Why? Because they need him to play. Like it's not a misdiagnosis of the game. It's just like sometimes just other guys are around and now they're not anymore. So I do want to like kind of get out ahead of what I think would be some people's thing is like, oh, they made some huge mistake on Trent and Watford. I don't think that's the case. Now, that being said, do I think he deserves to play like all the way these rotation minutes through the rest of the season? Yeah, for sure. They need exactly sort of what he can bring. Coming back next year, hey, look, I think this team's going to look very similar to what it looks like next year, right? Like I think they don't have a lot of moves to make, even though some of the other guys who are like kind of the guys who are actually playing now, I think we see him back. Is there going to be more of a market? I mean, he's definitely helping himself. You would think to like expand the market a little bit here. Like good for him. Maybe that will make it hard for the Nets. It would suck if it did. But I mean, that's just sort of the nature of the game at this point.
And in some ways, I think like we did hear from Portland Trailblazers fans early on when he got some early doses where, they would tell you, yeah, this is, we've seen him do this in spurts in Portland. So I think sometimes when you're, a bench guy, a small role guy, you're only going to know it once you see it over 82 games and you start to see an expanded sample size. I want to close out, by the way, because it's just clicked in my head and we're going to have, away from the game conversations about Cam Thomas coming up. But I did chuckle. There was a possession in the second half of this one. And it's Spencer Dinwiddie and Cam Thomas. And they're coming down the offensive end, and Cam Thomas, like they're explaining back and forth, Cam Thomas, why it was that you fouled me to Spencer Dinwiddie, why no, it was not. But I always find that dynamic so interesting for guys that go from playing together on the same team, a veteran heading towards the back end versus a young player on the come up, and now you're on opposite sides of the game. And I think the way that those interactions happen, it's like Cam Thomas saying, hey, man, when we were teammates, that's all good, and I'm ready to learn from you. Now that you're on the other side, I'm going to treat you like an aging veteran that I think I'm better than now, right? Like I just think that those are really fun to watch inside of these games, and it was an interesting dynamic from them in the second half.
And Dinwiddie had some interesting quotes before the game. I clearly wasn't happy. He's been pretty vocal on his way out about talking like he wasn't allowed to run pick and roll or ISO stuff. Which was kind of true. I mean, he ran it a lot last year, but he really wasn't running it this year. I know some people were like, "Oh, that's all he did." I was like, he didn't do it this year, right? Like he was being off-ball guard to the point where we're like, "Hey, what's going on? They don't run this anymore." We talked about this many times, but he's been pretty vocal about like liking. I mean, he said it right before the game. He was like, "I like the players," and he was kind of has implied that he didn't like anything else that was happening with the team, coaching and front office stuff. No, but I think it's the nature of competitive stuff that these guys. Sometimes the better you know a guy, the more competitive you are with them, right? Because
it's almost like, I want to show you. I want, we went at each other in practice, and now we get to butt heads during the game. Not contentious,
you just don't
but
get
just
to this point without being the most insane competitor of all time. Like you just can't. Like these people would be. You would think the competitive level of these guys, you would probably, if they were in your everyday life, you would think they were psychotic because they're so competitive. That's a compliment, by the way. It's like the only way you get there. There's lots of people that are really good at basketball. There's very few that actually get to play in the NBA. Sometimes the thing that puts you over the top is that you have almost psychotic competitive nature that you just can't turn. You never want them to turn it off. So I kind of just see it as that.
And people, they don't know this about me, but at 5'8", it really, I just didn't have the basketball competitive nature. The skill set was all there, but it's just the competitive nature. That's what I lacked. That's what held me back.
It was just like you were, 4 tools, and the last one was height and competitive stuff. Yeah, there's a couple tools. There was a few other stuff missing too. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. We'll talk a little more Cam Thomas offseason stuff, other moves that like might be on the horizon for the Nets as we, sprint. Trudge, walk, however we're going toward the end of this Nets season. Got some other cool stuff. Got a cool crossover plan for this week too with other folks in the Brooklyn Nets podcasting space.
Yeah.
So we're working on stuff for the rest of this week. So make sure you go check all that out. Like I said, we'll talk about some more Cam Thomas tomorrow.
Thank you for life and all the little ups and downs that make it worth living. Why, that is Travis Barker.
Oh my goodness, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.